Hi everyone, welcome back to the AI language. So today we are going to set up a Python Flask backend for our apps, and I code a lot of Flutter apps and I need the backend for that. So I'm writing the backend for one of them right now, and I have recorded all the steps starting from the first one, very simple steps to create this backend. Let me give you a glimpse of what are we going to look at. So we are going to start with creating a Gmail account so that we can set up our Google Cloud. We're going to set up the GCLOUD command line interface so that we can use all the commands to manage our deployments and runs. And we're also going to use Docker. So we'll install Docker on our desktop on Mac, and we are going to use that to containerize our application. Let me also give you a glimpse of the application itself. So this is the app that we're going to build. It's going to have two routes for our APIs. One is the root path and one is the v1/get-info, which is one of the routes that we're setting up for the demo. You can expand this to as many routes as you want. For each route, we'll actually define middleware. The middleware is going to check for authentication in this case, and we are going to use an API key for checking it. The middleware will be put inside a folder called the middleware folder, and you can add as many middleware as you like over here. Apart from that, we are going to then go on to the root. So this is made in a modular way, so you can add as many routes as you want. But just to look at it, we have a get info route, which is going to just respond with a custom message for now, and you can actually expand it to as many as much of logic as you want over here, and add other routes as well. We're going to have a Dockerfile, which will actually give all the instructions for containerizing our application, and I'll walk through the details of what each of these lines mean over here. And at the end, what we expect is that you'll be able to call your backend API, which is hosted on a URL provided by Google Cloud, and you can get a response based on what you have coded in over there. If you think you'll find this useful, please do like and subscribe to our channel. It's a long video, but please stick through it and follow each of the steps if you want to set up a Python Flask backend for your app. Okay, so first let's set up a new Google account that we are going to use to create a project on the Google Cloud platform. So for that, I'll just simply search for create a new Google account, and I'll go to that. Let's click over here, and as you can see, it says you can go to the Google account sign in page and click on create account. So you might have existing accounts, and we want to avoid those. So what I'll do is I'll open this in a new incognito window. Okay, and I'll click on create account, and over here I'm going to use for my work or for my business, and you can choose this accordingly. Since I'm going to be using it for an app, I'll choose for my work or for my business. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead with a Gmail address over here. Alright, and it'll ask me for a first name or a last name. So just for this demo, I'm going to put the AI language, and I'll put demo as the last name for myself. You can choose whatever is appropriate for you. Okay, and after filling in those details, it might provide you with these options. And for now, I'm following this format of using the AI language dot demo. So put in a Gmail address that you prefer, and then click next. Okay, and then we can create a new password for ourselves. And it will verify your phone number as well. So please put in your phone number. So I've put in my phone number over here. Okay, so I have set up my Google account that I'm going to use. It does ask you for a little bit more information like your phone number, a recovery email and all. So please follow those steps to set it up. And once you have your account set up, for now, I'm going to use not now to set up my business, right? And continue to use the Google account, right? So now I have this Google account set up, and I can use this for setting up my Google Cloud project. Okay, so now let's create a Google Cloud project. So we open a new tab and go to Google Cloud platform, and here we have it. Okay, and let's click on sign in first. Let's click next. So enter a password. Alright, so now we have signed into a Google account, and we can actually click on get started for free. Alright, and to start for free with $300 free in credit, you need to click on start free, but you will need a particular payments profile. Okay, now since I am recording a demo and it's not for an organization, I'll choose Sync Individual over here. I'll actually have to put in my details, the real details, true details over here, because it does require my legal name over here. So I'm going to do that and then click create. Now I've completed the payments profile and I added a credit card which was charged a very minimal amount for verification, and we're presented with this welcome screen. So a small disclaimer over here that please make sure that you read and understand all the things that you are entering and accepting as policies from Google, because this is a live account that can be used for hosting things. It can be charged amounts, right? And you are responsible for the creation and conduct of this account. So do give that proper attention and consideration before proceeding. Right now over here we ask some very basic stuff like what best describes the organization needs. So let me just say it's a very small company, I guess a startup, right? And we click next. And what brought you to Google Cloud? And let's say learn more and explore. And then what are your interests? So let's choose web and mobile apps for now. And then what best describes your role, and you can put in whatever suits you. I'm going to put engineer developer over here and click done. Okay, and now as you see, you have the welcome page and you have some free credits to use over here which expire in around 3 months of time. Okay, so let's check out the project that we have over here. So Google has already created a project for us which is called the My First Project, and it has a specific ID over here, and we'll stick with this for now and use this for further setup. Alright, so let's move further. Now we'll install the GCLOUD CLI, which is the command line interface for Google Cloud. So let's search install the Google Cloud CLI. Alright, and we get this link. Let's click here. Okay, and here we are with all the instructions. So I'm using Mac OS and I'll choose this. So first what we need to do is that we need to confirm whether we have a supported version of Python installed or not. Alright, and let's do that. So we'll open terminal, and here we have our terminal window, and then let's just follow the instructions from Google's page. So we first need to check whether we have Python 3 or not. So let's just check Python 3 -v, and we have Python 3.12.2 installed, right? And in case you don't have this installed, what we can do is that we can install a Python version by going to Python releases for macOS. So let's look at that as well once, right? So it says the latest one is Python 3.13.1. So let me just try to install that over 3.12. So when you scroll down, you see all these files available. Now since I'm on Mac OS, I can use this particular file over here just to confirm what Mac OS version you are running. You can actually press command space and you can select about this Mac, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this file and allow the downloads, right? And I'm going to wait for this to download. Once you have downloaded this installer for Mac OS, you can go to your downloads, click on this and open that particular package over here, and you'll be presented with the Python installer. So you can follow the instructions in the installer. I'm going to do that right now for myself. So now I click on install. Okay, so now this is going to install Python 3.13.1 for me. So for now I'm going to click close and I'll move the installer to the bin. And now let me go to the terminal, and if I just do this again, I'll get the updated Python version, which is Python 3.13.1. So this way you can install Python if you don't already have it installed. And now we can continue with our Google Cloud command line interface setup. So let's go back to our browser and click on back to go back to Google Cloud. And let's go on to the next step. So the next step is to download one of the following, which is the package for Google Cloud CLI. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ARM64 Apple M1 Silicon because that's what my machine is. Let's click on this and it says we want to allow downloads, and again we allow the download and wait for the download to complete. Okay, so once the download completes, let's go and select the downloaded tar file and it should automatically expand. All right, and now we see that we have downloaded the Google Cloud SDK. It's expanded into a folder over here, and what we are going to do is we are going to move this to our development directory that we had built last time. So we'll go to development. Over here we press command enter to open a new terminal, open a new tab, and let's just try dragging it right over here, and we have it dragged over here. So now all our stuff is well arranged inside the development directory. Okay, so now since we have the SDK downloaded, we can go on to the next steps, which is to actually install it. So let's copy this command from here to install the SDK, and let's paste it in our shell. And of course we need to shift to the development directory and then paste this command. So this is going to install the Google command line interface for us, Google Cloud command line interface. And do you want to help improve Google? So let me choose no for now over here. Okay, and it gives me a set of components that it has installed. Apart from the components, it will also update your path variable and enable shell command completions. And it also asks for a RC file for any kind of settings that need to be put in that file. So I'll leave this blank to use the default one. I don't want to run the Python installer since I've already installed it. So I'll say no over there. Then I go back and start with the init command. So this is the init command for me, and let's just paste it over here. So this will ask us to actually log in to our Google account, and there that is. So you must sign in to continue. Would you like to sign in? So I'll say yes. So sign in using your account over here. So once you've signed in, it asks for permission. So I'm going to click continue over here. Okay, and now it says you are authenticated with Google command line interface. So I'll go back to the terminal, and it says pick a cloud project to use. So this is going to be the default project that it's going to use, and I'm going to use the first item. So I'm going to press 1 and enter that. So it set the current project now, and it seems all the init aspects have been completed. Okay, so now we are pretty much set up with our Google account, the Google Cloud setup, and the command line interface. And now we need to install something called Docker, right? So what Dockers do is that they basically package applications into containers, which includes the code, the runtime, the libraries, etc. And in a way separating the application from the environment and the infrastructure. So it basically helps you focus on the application, build it quickly, and deploy it on different infrastructures like your local environment or on Google Cloud or anywhere else. So what we'll do is we'll first install Docker Desktop for Mac OS. To do that, let's search for install Docker Desktop for Mac OS, and you'll get this link. So click on that, and then download the Docker Desktop for Mac with Apple or Intel chip based on whatever your Mac has. If you're working on some other platform, you can actually appropriately choose that particular installation for Docker Desktop. Okay, so we'll wait for the download to complete. All right, so once the Docker download completes, you can actually click on the downloaded DMG file over there, and it's just a simple drag and drop two applications over here, and all right, and so I might have already got it installed. So I'll just say I'll just say stop. I'll not move this actually. Let the old one be, and you should find Docker in your applications over here, and you can then open it by typing Docker, and this will open basically your Docker application for you. All right, so I'm going to accept the terms over here and use the recommended settings. After entering my password, so I have this, and I'll just continue without signing in and choose some value for this and going applications, and then click continue, and I have this Docker application open for me. I'm just going to minimize it and keep it on the side. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the terminal and configure Docker to work with gcloud auth. So the command for that is gcloud auth configure dash docker. And what this command does is that it is used to configure Docker to authenticate with Google Cloud's container registry, where we are going to upload all our containers. All right. So for now, let's follow all the instructions. So do you want to continue? And I'll say yes. And Docker configuration file has been updated, right? Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll go back to the Finder. And if you remember, we made a projects directory in our folder during the last videos. And what we'll do is we'll create a new folder over here and we'll call it my new backend. And this is where we'll hold all our backend code. Now what I'll do is I'll open this folder in VS Code. So you can open VS Code and click on open for the folder over here. And then you can actually go to your development directory, projects, and then open your my new backend folder. So now you have this my new backend folder open, and we'll create two new files over here. One is the app.py file, which is going to be my main Python file. And we're also going to create a new file which is called the Dockerfile. So this file, for now, I'm going to paste this code, and you can find a link for this code from the description below. Okay, let's now understand what each of the lines in the Dockerfile means, right? So the first one is telling Docker to use Python 3 slim variant, which is Python 3.9 for now, and include that in the container. And that's what it's going to use to compile and run the app. Then it sets the work directory inside the container to /app. This is the directory inside the container. Then it's going to take all the content from your local directory, which is this, and copy it to this work directory inside the container. Then we're going to create some config directories and files. But for now, what we'll tell the Docker is to actually copy that particular file which you're yet to create, which is config dev service account key.json, and transfer it to the working directory inside the container, right? So this line runs a command inside the Docker container to install all the packages that we'll mention in requirements.txt, and this is the file that we'll create so that we can mention all the requirements for our app. This particular line will expose port 8080 so that the container will listen on this port at runtime. So, whenever you actually put a URL for the container, you'll have to specify the port as 8080. Now, these two lines actually set up some environment variables. Specifically important is the Google application credentials, which basically tell our application where the Google application credentials are present. For now, this is actually the app directory where we had copied it above, and this is the key file name that we are going to create later on. And finally, the Docker will run the application, which is app.py, using Python 3 based on this command. All these commands are going to be run when the container launches, and it's going to set up our application and run it. Alright, so now we head back to VS Code and we'll first install the extension for Python. So search for Python and you'll get this extension from Microsoft, and let's install this. Alright, so we have installed this now, and let's now go to our app.py file and our workspace. For the next steps, we'll first create a few directories over here. So let's create a new folder and call it helpers. So we'll put all our helper functions over here. Then let's create a new folder and call it endpoints. So this will be the logic for all the API endpoints that we are going to build. And then let's again create a new folder which is called middleware. So this is going to be some code that is going to be run for all the endpoints that, for example, checks authentication for us. And then let's create another folder called config. This will help us save any configuration files. Now we need to install Flask. So we'll go to our terminal over here. So we'll write pip3 install Flask. Okay, so it has installed Flask for us now, right? And now we can start with writing our basic app.py code. So I'm going to paste a code snippet over here, which is this. We are going to use a Flask app for our backend, and Flask is a lightweight Python framework for building web applications. It helps you with URL routing, it helps you with applying middleware very easily, and it's very scalable and flexible and very easy to pick up as well. and that's what we are going to use for our app. Okay, so let's look at this code now. This is a basic Flask app with the main function over here that basically exposes this API and app on port 8080, and it basically exposes two endpoints. One is the root endpoint over here. Whenever we don't specify any particular path on the API, the root endpoint will be triggered. And for now, we don't expect any of our apps or any of our tools or users to actually call this API. So we just display a message saying that this is the root API, and you can go to this particular website to start building, and you can replace this with whatever website you're working with. The second route, which is the meaningful non-trivial route over here used for the demo, is get info. And whenever you're going to ping this route, either through a post request or an options request, it's going to run an endpoint. And we are yet to define this endpoint, but we'll assume that this is going to run the get info endpoint. Now we can actually go up and see the middleware over here. So what we're going to do is that before every request, we the first thing that we'll do is we'll check authentication. And for the demo, that's the only thing we are going to run. Now the request from a client like a browser can be an options request. An options request, as mentioned over here, is a method that allows a client to determine communication options for the server or resource that it's trying to ping. And this will generally be an unauthenticated request, and so we need to handle it specially. And we first segregate all those requests which are just options requests by calling process options response middleware, and we're going to make this middleware after this. If the request method is not options, like it can be a post request or a get request, then we handle it based on path. So you might want that okay, there's a certain path like version 1/get info which should be handled in a certain way, and you might want to call some other middleware for that. For a version 2 API, you might want something else, and so these are some base cases. Right now we are calling the same middleware for both, for all kinds of paths over here. It's just to showcase that you can have multiple middlewares being called over here. And then once we call this middleware, we get an auth response, and if there is an auth failed response, we will return the auth failed response. Otherwise, we'll print auth success, and the responses will be returned by the endpoints over here. Alright, so first let's work on the process options response. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to our helpers, and we are going to make a file over here. Let's call this options_helper.py, and let's paste a code snippet over here, which again you can actually get from the link from the description. So what we are doing over here is that we are basically taking an empty response, right, and assigning a status code of 204, which basically indicates a successful response without any content to return, which is the case over here. But we're going to add some headers to our response. The headers are what basically tell the calling client what the options are for this backend service or server. So what we are trying to say over here is that we are going to allow all origins for requests. So you can make a request from any other domain that you want. The headers that are allowed in the request are authorization and content type. And you're going to allow two types of requests. One is a post request, and the other is the options request. And then you're going to return the response after adding these headers to that. So that your client, which makes this options call before making the actual post call, knows that all this is allowed, and then it can actually successfully make the post call and successfully receive a response based on that. Okay, so let's save this file and go back to our app.py, and then try to actually import this. So it gives me a quick fix from helpers.options_helper import process options response, which seems good, and now I have this imported. All right, now we are going to go to the next function that we need to implement, which is check API key. All right, so what I'm assuming over here is that my request will have a API key in the header, and I'm going to check that API key and make sure that my user is authenticated. There could be other ways of authenticating your users. For example, if you're building a Flutter app or any app, and you're making a post request, let's say you're using Firebase login or any other kind of login, you would have a authorization header with a token, right? And that token would be passed in inside the header, and you could check against that. And there might be other ways of doing this as well, but for now, for simplicity, we are going to use the API key. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go to the middleware folder and we'll make a file over here which is called check underscore API underscore key dot py. I'm going to code this simple code snippet over here, which is the definition for check API key function, which takes in the Flask request object as a parameter. If you remember, we actually passed this request as a argument to this function, check API key over here. And now what we are doing over here is that we are accessing the request object headers and trying to get the header with the key X API key, right? The value for this header will be our actual API key that we are going to use to authenticate, and we would have assigned this when we are making a post request to our API, right? So that's our API key. And just for the demo, I'm going to hard code the valid API key over here, which is not the best way to do it, but just for the demo, we are going to keep the valid API key over here. And below that, we are just going to check whether we found the actual API key in the header. So this is not going to throw an error if it's not present. It's just going to throw a none value if your API key is not present in the header, and this condition is going to be true. Or if you have an API key and it's not equal to the valid key that you have over here, then this condition is going to be true. In both cases, we return an error response. So we're going to return an error response with unauthorized. A message will be an invalid API key, and the status code would be 401 for that. If the API key is actually valid, right, which would be the case if this if condition is not run, then we don't return a response from our middleware, right, from our authentication middleware, because we now want to go on to the actual endpoint that's going to do the processing for us. So we're going to leave it just like that, not return anything as a response, but just return a none over here, right? And if you see, we have an auth failed response over here. So if the auth failed response exists, which is like an error response that we return from here, we're going to actually return that auth failed response back to our client. If it does not exist, that if a none was returned over there, we just print an auth success over here, and we continue on to our endpoint, which would be the get info endpoint. All right, so now we are going to code in the get info endpoint, which we are using over here, right? So just to make a correction over here, I'll add the correct path that I want over here, which is v1/getinfo, which matches the path being used in the check authentication middleware. Now what I'll do is I'll make a new file over here and I'll call that get underscore info.py. And you could actually add different Python files over here for all your endpoints, or maybe make folders and then add files under those folders with multiple files for one endpoint. So I'm going to paste this code snippet for defining my get info endpoint, which takes in the request object from Flask as an argument. And what we are going to do over here is we are going to do a basic auth check. So we're just going to check if the X API key is present or not, and if it's not, we're going to return the unauthorized error response, the status code being 401 for that. If we do have the auth header, we are going to just actually do whatever processing we want and return a response. So over here, what we are going to do is we're just going to return a response with the key message and the value success, and that's going to be our data. We're going to use JSONify to make a JSON out of it, put the status code as 200, which is used for success, and then we're going to return the response after adding the options headers. So we're just going to add the options headers again before returning the final response, so that the calling client does record that all the options that we have specified are allowed. Now we can actually save all the files, press Command Alt S to save all of them, and we go back to app.py, and now we have the get info function defined. So we have not included or imported these functions. So what we'll do is we'll try to import them. So we're going to import from middleware.check API key this function, and we're going to import the get info function from endpoints.getinfo, and now we have both these functions imported. Let's save the files again. Alright, so now we are going to build a Docker image and then push it to Google Container Registry and then deploy it on Google Cloud. Now to do that, one aspect that's still left is to actually populate the config directory. And if you go to the Docker file, you see that we need a dev folder with a service account key.json file inside it, right? So we'll go to the config folder over here, create a new folder which is called dev, and then create a new file which I'll call the service account key.json file, right? And for now I'm going to leave this file blank because I don't need anything to be done on the Google Cloud platform itself. I just need the Google Cloud platform to host my Docker image. But whenever in future you want to connect to a database, like let's say Firestore or any other aspect of Google Cloud, you will need to create a service account for your API and give that access to this particular backend by including a service account key.json file over here. All right. Okay, so one more thing that we have missed out is the requirements.txt. So for that, we'll write pip3 freeze and specify the file name, which is requirements.txt. And what this does is that it lists all the requirements in this particular file, which are basically the dependencies that our project has. Okay, now I'm back to the app.py file, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the terminal over here and try to now build a Docker image, right? And that's the image that we're going to then push to Google Container Registry and then deploy on Google Cloud, right? So to do that, I use the docker build command, and just to show you all the different options with that, you can actually type --help and you'll get all these options. We are going to use a few of them for now. So first option that we are going to use is the platform option. Let's locate that over here. That's over here, right? And this specifies the target platform for the Docker image. So we're going to use Linux/AMD64 because that's what's needed to actually run it on Google Cloud, right? So basically this refers to the Linux OS running a 64-bit x86 architecture. The other option that we're going to use is the no cache option, and this basically makes sure that the build process does not use cached layers. So normally what happens is Docker caches intermediate layers in the build process to speed up subsequent builds, and using this option forces it to rebuild every layer from scratch, and it is especially useful when you want to ensure a fresh build without relying on any potential outdated cached layers, right? So that's what we're going to use. And lastly, we have the -t. So we can find it over here. And this is basically the tag. And what this does is that it tags the build image with a name and optionally a version or any location that you want to put in. So the /t stands for tag, and the GCR.io and other aspects that we'll be mentioning after this will refer to the Google Cloud Container Registry, where you can store your images, and then you can follow that by a project name. So whatever project we are using, we can write that, and then finally we can put in a / and put in the name of the image being built. All right, so let's write this command now. So we'll write docker build, and then we're going to put platform, we write Linux/AMD64, and then after that we are going to specify the no cache option. Then we'll follow that with our tag. So we'll specify GCR.io for the Google Container Registry. Then we'll use our project name from our Google Cloud Console. So this is our project name that we had created earlier on. Let's go back and paste this over here, right? And then let's put backend. Let's put my-backend over here as the image name. And we have to specify the dot at the end, which basically tells Docker to look for the Docker file in the current directory and copy all the files from here, and then we start the build process. Once we have built the Docker image, we can write Docker images, and we see that I have two images over here. One is the one that I just built, and there's another image that I had earlier on. Okay, so now we are going to push this image from our local environment to the registry, and for that we're going to use the docker push command, and then just simply specify this image. And let's just specify this image name over here and press enter. Now when you push this, you might receive some errors for APIs that need to be enabled on the Google Cloud. If you get such an error, just copy the URL with that error and go to your browser and enable that. So one important thing to note over here is that the format for the name has to follow this convention, which is GCR.io, that basically specifies the container registry, followed by the project name and followed by an image name. So if you try it with this kind of a reference, it's not going to work because it's not going to find a project named Python backend on the cloud, and this is going to fail. If you receive an error for enabling your artifacts registry API, just copy the link and go to your browser. And once you go to your browser, you'll actually end up at APIs and services, and you'll get a link to enable this particular API. Click on the enable button over there to enable it. And once you're done with that, you'll come to this page where it just says that the API is enabled and it's basically available for use. Alright, so now we are going to deploy this container and make it run on Google Cloud Run. So for that, we'll basically say GCLOUD run. This is the Google Cloud Run service that we're going to use, and we're going to use the deploy command and give the service a name. So let's call it my-backend again, right? And let's continue on to the next line over here, and then we'll specify the image, right? We'll put a double dash and we'll write image, and we'll specify our image name. So we have it over here. Let's copy and paste it from here itself. Then we specify the platform. So we are going to use a fully managed platform because Google Cloud Run is a serverless platform which is fully managed, and this is the most common option for serverless deployments, right? Then we're going to put a slash again and continue to the next line, and now we'll specify the region. So you can specify any Google Cloud region that you prefer. I'm going to specify Asia South 1, and then I'm going to ask it to allow unauthenticated request, and this is because this is going to be an API for an app, right? And when the users call this API, they'll be calling it from their own logins using whatever login service I'm using, for example Firebase login. So the user will be providing a token which will be a Firebase access token, and the API itself needs to be available for anyone to call, and then our middleware will actually check authentication and any kind of authorizations, right? So whether the user is authentic and whether they're authorized to access this resource with their authentication will be checked by the API itself. We need to enable the run.googleapis.com for this particular project, and I'll say yes to enable that. Alright, so that was an error because of a logger that I was using from one of my projects, which I have now removed, and I'm going to try to deploy it again after redoing the build and the push of the container image. Okay, so now this deploys successfully, and what we can do is we can click on this link and open it right over here to see what happens. And if you see, it says error unauthorized and the message is invalid API key, and this is because our check API middleware is firing perfectly fine and it's actually giving out this result over here, right? So what we can do to check this is to use curl or some other service to make a request with an API key in the header, right? So let's do that. Alright, so to write the curl request, I'll go to app.py over here, and I see that I have two paths, get info, and I have another path which is the root path. Alright, so let me try to paste a command over here. Okay, so this is a simple curl request with a header, and if you see, I have specified the post method over here with my URL and my path. The path has to exactly match, so let me just put a capital I over here, and then I have specified a custom header with X API key as the value that I have, and I have specified the content type as application JSON, and I don't need a payload for now, which is specified by the -d flag, so I can actually remove this from here. And I'll press enter, and I get the message success. And if you check your endpoint over here, which is the get info endpoint, you see that the success message has been received, which shows that our API is working and it is able to check for authentication using the API key. Okay, and now I can also try to make a request to my root path, but just as information, I have not specified any method over here, so it will not allow any specific method to go to the root path. If instead I did actually specify a post method for my root API, it would have worked with the curl request over here. So that's it. This now runs as a perfectly fine backend running on Google Cloud, and you can actually link it with any of your apps, front-end applications, or any backend services that you like, and host custom code over here. And just as a precautionary note, since this is a demo API, we don't want to leave this online, right? So what we will do is that we will actually take it offline after we have done all our testing, and once we are in production with proper authentication and some rate limiting that we might need to assign to these APIs, we can actually leave them online for our applications, right? To list the services that are running, you can actually use the GCLOUD run services list command, and when you run this, it will list all the services that are running. So it shows that your my-backend service is right now online, and to delete this, you basically use the delete command and you specify my-backend as the service to delete, and the service my-backend will be deleted, and you say yes. And now this deletes your service. So now your API is no longer online, and you can actually test it using the curl command over here. And when you do this, it says the requested URL was not found in this server. And if you want to just redeploy it, you can just follow the same steps again, push the image and just run it on Google Cloud, deploy it on Google Cloud, and it will come back online again.